Prince Harry finally broke his silence, and what he revealed about Meghan Markle is absolutely chilling. Sources close to the Duke claim he's been struggling with a devastating realization. Everything about his relationship with Meghan might have been orchestrated from the very beginning. "She had me from day one," insiders say Harry admitted in private, "and I was too blind to see it." But now the evidence is piling up, and the truth behind their fairy tale romance is far darker than anyone imagined. What started as a love story that captivated the world has unraveled into a web of manipulation, secrets, and calculated moves that would make even Hollywood's most ruthless power players uncomfortable. And Harry? He's finally waking up to the reality that he wasn't the prince who found his princess. He was the target all along. Let's go back to where it all began, because the story you think you know about Meghan and Harry's relationship isn't the real one. Long before Harry ever laid eyes on Meghan Markle, she had already begun preparing for their meeting. This wasn't fate, this wasn't destiny, this was strategy. According to multiple sources who've come forward in recent months, Meghan maintained something that would send chills down anyone's spine: a vision board. And on that vision board, photos of Prince Harry, images of the royal family, pictures of Princess Diana, and cutouts representing the life she intended to live. This wasn't some casual daydream or celebrity crush. This was a blueprint for social climbing on a scale most people couldn't even comprehend. Trevor Engelson, Meghan's ex-husband, allegedly discovered notebooks and journals during their marriage that detailed her obsession with British royalty and her fascination with Princess Diana's legacy. At the time, he brushed it off as harmless fantasy. Now, those same journals represent something far more sinister: evidence that Meghan had been plotting her entrance into Harry's world years before they ever met. But having a vision board isn't enough to capture a prince. You need access, connections, and someone on the inside who can engineer the perfect introduction. Enter Marcus Anderson, the mysterious figure who's been lurking in the shadows of Meghan's rise to power. Anderson wasn't just a friend or casual acquaintance. He was Meghan's access broker, her social architect, the man who opened doors that would normally remain locked to a cable television actress. As the global membership director for Soho House, Anderson controlled entry to one of the world's most exclusive networks, a playground for celebrities, royalty, and the ultra-wealthy. Meghan didn't just stumble into Soho House circles. She was deliberately positioned there, given membership she couldn't afford, invited to events far above her social standing, and introduced to people who could move her closer to her ultimate goal. The yacht photos that surfaced from Croatia weren't random vacation snapshots. They were proof of Meghan's presence in circles she had no business being in, at least not without someone bankrolling her access and engineering her invitations. Anderson's connection to both Meghan and key members of the royal social circle created the perfect storm. He knew Harry's friends, understood his patterns, and had the influence to create what appeared to be a chance encounter. When Meghan and Harry finally met in July 2016, it was presented as a blind date arranged by a mutual friend. But was it really blind? Or had Meghan already researched every detail of Harry's life, studied his vulnerabilities, understood his deepest wounds, and prepared exactly how to position herself as the answer to everything he'd been searching for? The timeline tells a disturbing story. Within weeks of their first meeting, Meghan had already begun documenting their relationship on social media in carefully curated posts that seemed spontaneous, but were anything but. She wore bracelets matching Harry's, posted cryptic messages about love and fate, and began subtly signaling to those paying attention that she'd achieved her goal. Harry, still grieving his mother's death and struggling with his role in the royal family, had no idea he was being played like a carefully tuned instrument. The manipulation didn't stop at their initial meeting. Meghan employed tactics that would make psychologists deeply uncomfortable, strategies designed to create emotional dependency and forge connections that felt profound but were entirely manufactured. One of the most disturbing revelations comes from insiders who witnessed Meghan's use of scent manipulation. She reportedly wore a specific perfume during their early encounters, one she'd researched for its psychological effects on memory and emotion. Every intimate moment, every vulnerable conversation, every time Harry felt truly seen and understood, that scent was present, creating a Pavlovian response that tied his deepest emotions to her presence. When they were apart, she'd send items carrying that same fragrance, triggering those manufactured feelings and keeping Harry emotionally tethered even across continents. This wasn't romance. This was psychological engineering. But the scent strategy was just the beginning. Multiple sources now claim that Meghan recorded their private moments from the very start, not for sentimental reasons or cherished memories, but as insurance. Intimate conversations where Harry opened up about his family, vulnerable moments when he criticized the institution he was born into, private discussions about his doubts and fears, all allegedly captured and stored. Why would someone record their partner without consent unless they plan to use that material as leverage later? The thought is disturbing, but it explains so much about what came next. As their relationship progressed, Harry began making decisions that shocked everyone who knew him. He distanced himself from lifelong friends who expressed concerns about the relationship's rapid pace. He stopped confiding in William, who had allegedly voiced reservations about how quickly things were moving. He became isolated from the support network that had helped him through his darkest times. And who was whispering in his ear through it all? Meghan, positioning herself as the only person who truly understood him, the only one who had his best interests at heart. The isolation tactics accelerated after their engagement. Friends who'd been close to Harry for decades suddenly found themselves cut off, their calls unreturned, their invitations declined. When some tried to reach out with concerns, they were met with hostility or simply frozen out completely. Thomas Markle's disastrous lead-up to the wedding wasn't just family drama. It was a masterclass in creating chaos that ensured Meghan arrived at the altar with no family present who might speak uncomfortable truths. Harry's family, already concerned about the relationship's trajectory, found themselves powerless to intervene. Any criticism of Meghan was immediately framed as racism or institutional cruelty, putting the royals in an impossible position where expressing legitimate concerns became a PR nightmare. Meghan had effectively created a fortress around Harry, with herself as the only gateway to the outside world.
The wedding itself tells a story that most people missed at the time. When you look beyond the ceremony's beautiful optics and examine the guest list with a critical eye, something disturbing emerges. This wasn't a celebration of Harry's life and relationships. It was Meghan's networking event, carefully curated to advance her position and solidify her connections with the elite. Oprah Winfrey, who barely knew the couple, received a coveted invitation. George and Amal Clooney, virtual strangers to Harry, sat prominently among the guests. Meghan's Soho House connections filled the pews. Marcus Anderson and his network of wealthy, influential power brokers who'd facilitated her rise. Meanwhile, Harry's childhood friends, people who'd been by his side through his mother's death and his years of military service, were mysteriously unavailable or not invited at all. The palace insisted on a certain guest list, but Meghan reportedly fought those suggestions at every turn, insisting on her own carefully selected attendees. The reception revealed even more. While traditional royal weddings focus on family and long-standing relationships, Meghan's reception felt like a Hollywood premiere mixed with a business conference. The conversations weren't about celebrating Harry and Meghan's love story. They were about deals, connections, opportunities, and advancement. Guests later reported feeling like they'd attended a strategic summit rather than a wedding celebration. Meghan worked the room like a political candidate, making connections, planting seeds for future collaborations, and positioning herself at the center of a new power network that spanned entertainment, politics, and royalty. Harry, by contrast, seemed almost peripheral at his own wedding, smiling for photos but clearly uncomfortable with the transactional energy filling the room. Friends who attended would later describe a sinking feeling, a sense that something was fundamentally wrong. But in the moment, who could voice those concerns without sounding bitter or jealous?
But while the world saw a fairy tale wedding, Harry was slowly discovering truths that would shake him to his core. The first major revelation came from an unexpected source, Trevor Engelson, Meghan's first husband, who'd remained silent for years out of respect and self-preservation. But as Meghan's profile grew and her narrative became increasingly divorced from reality, Trevor allegedly began sharing details with close friends that eventually leaked to those paying attention. The most explosive claim, that Meghan had confessed during their marriage that she couldn't have children naturally. This wasn't presented as a maybe or a concern. According to Trevor's account, it was stated as fact, a medical reality that devastated her at the time and became a source of tension in their relationship. Trevor, who wanted a family, struggled with this information, but he committed to exploring alternatives and staying by her side. Yet Meghan's behavior changed after that confession, becoming more distant, more focused on her career, more willing to sacrifice their relationship for opportunities that might advance her fame. The way their marriage ended tells you everything you need to know about Meghan's calculated nature. There was no dramatic fight, no final confrontation where they aired their grievances and decided to part ways. Trevor came home one day to find Meghan's belongings gone. No note, no explanation, no conversation, just absence. She'd filmed a project in Toronto, made connections she deemed more valuable than her marriage, and simply walked away from the life they'd built together. Weeks later, her wedding rings arrived in the mail with no message, no closure, no acknowledgement of the years they'd spent together. For Trevor, it was a devastating betrayal. But in hindsight, it was also a preview of Meghan's modus operandi. When someone no longer serves her purpose, they're discarded without ceremony or consideration. Trevor's friends claim he was shattered by the cold, calculated nature of the breakup. But he moved on, rebuilt his life, and stayed silent about the details, believing his ex-wife deserved privacy despite how she treated him. That changed when Meghan began her relationship with Harry, because Trevor realized something horrifying. If Meghan had told him she couldn't have children, why was she now discussing pregnancy and family planning with a prince, as though no such medical reality existed? Either she'd lied to Trevor to facilitate the end of their marriage, or she was lying to Harry about her ability to conceive naturally. Either scenario painted a disturbing picture of manipulation and deception. Friends of Trevor's who eventually shared these details weren't doing so out of spite. They were genuinely concerned that Harry was being misled about something as fundamental as starting a family. And when Meghan announced her first pregnancy shortly after the wedding, people close to Trevor immediately questioned the timeline, the details, and whether everything was as it appeared. The pregnancy announcement photos looked staged. The bumps seemed to shift size dramatically between appearances, and Meghan's behavior around discussing the pregnancy was oddly secretive and controlling in ways that raised eyebrows even among supporters. Then came the surrogacy rumors, whispered at first in fringe corners of the internet, but gradually gaining traction as more inconsistencies emerged. Photos showing Meghan's bump appearing to shift or fold in ways that seemed physically impossible for a natural pregnancy. Her refusal to follow royal protocol around birth announcements and medical transparency. The bizarre secrecy surrounding Archie's birth with conflicting statements about which hospital, which doctors, and even which day he was actually born. People who suggested surrogacy or questioned the official narrative were immediately attacked as conspiracy theorists or racists, but the questions didn't go away because the inconsistencies didn't go away. And if surrogacy was used, whether for legitimate medical reasons or strategic ones, why the secrecy? The issue wasn't the method of bringing a child into the world. The issue was the deception, the manipulation of royal succession, and the lying.
to Harry and the world about something so fundamental. Sources now claim that Harry himself began questioning the narratives he'd been fed. The turning point allegedly came when he started connecting dots between Meghan's stories about her past and the reality that others presented. Trevor's revelations about her confession regarding children, the timeline of their mating, and Meghan's vision board obsession, the recorded conversations she'd kept as insurance, the isolation from everyone who'd ever cared about him, the financial irregularities, how Meghan afforded her lifestyle before they met, who was bankrolling her expensive tastes, and why Marcus Anderson seemed to be funding access and opportunities that should have been far beyond her reach. When Harry started asking questions, Meghan's behavior allegedly changed dramatically. The loving, supportive partner who'd seemed so understanding suddenly became defensive, manipulative, and accusatory. She turned his questions back on him, framing his doubts as betrayal, his concerns as attacks, his desire for truth as evidence that he didn't truly love her. The psychological toll on Harry became impossible to hide. Friends and family who'd been frozen out during the relationship's early days began receiving disturbing signals that something was seriously wrong. William received a voicemail from Harry that sources describe as heartbreaking. His younger brother in tears, admitting he'd made a terrible mistake, saying he felt trapped and didn't know how to escape without destroying everything. But before William could respond or offer help, Harry called back with a completely different tone, claiming he'd been stressed and everything was fine. The sudden reversal suggested someone had intervened, listened to his moment of vulnerability, and immediately worked to control the narrative and shut down any potential rescue operation. That pattern repeated itself multiple times, moments of clarity and distress from Harry, followed by swift reversals and renewed commitment to the relationship, as though he were being pulled back from the edge every time he got close to breaking free.
The medication leak was the moment everything started crumbling publicly. Someone close to the situation allegedly revealed that Harry had been prescribed serious psychiatric medications to deal with anxiety, depression, and what some described as symptoms consistent with someone experiencing psychological abuse. The leak wasn't accidental. It was strategic, designed to paint a specific picture and control a narrative that was starting to slip away from Meghan's control. But the strategy backfired, because instead of generating sympathy, it raised questions. Why was Harry, who'd seemed happy and healthy before meeting Meghan, suddenly requiring heavy medication just to function? What had changed in his life that pushed him to such a dark psychological place? And why was this information being leaked now, at this specific moment? Unless someone needed to shape public perception before other, more damaging information emerged. Insiders describe Harry's mental state as deteriorating rapidly. The confident, charismatic prince who'd charmed the world had been replaced by someone who seemed hollow, going through the motions of public appearances but absent behind the eyes. At private events, he was described as withdrawn, reluctant to engage, and visibly uncomfortable whenever Meghan controlled the conversation or made decisions without consulting him. The Kris Jenner party incident became a perfect encapsulation of their dynamic and the wider rejection they were facing. Meghan desperately wanted access to that elite circle, seeing it as validation and an opportunity to rebuild her Hollywood credentials. She pushed hard for an invitation, leveraged every connection she had, and finally secured spots for both of them at one of the year's most exclusive events. But what should have been a triumph turned into a disaster that exposed just how far their star had fallen. The moment they arrived, the energy shifted. Celebrities who'd once courted their friendship suddenly had other places to be. Conversations stopped when they approached.
The carefully curated photos that Meghan demanded, specific angles, approved shots, control over what images left the venue, created tension and discomfort among other guests who weren't accustomed to such controlling behavior at private events. Meghan's insistence on approval rights before any photos to be shared or posted wasn't just about vanity. It was about control, about managing a narrative that was slipping through her fingers, about ensuring that every public image reinforced the story she needed people to believe. But Kim Kardashian, Kris Jenner, and the other power players at that party didn't build their empires by letting others control their narrative. Meghan's demands were noted, smiled at politely, and then completely ignored. Within hours of the party, something unprecedented happened in Hollywood social circles. Every photo featuring Meghan and Harry was quietly deleted, removed from social media, scrubbed from the public record of the event. It wasn't about the photos themselves. It was a message, a signal to everyone paying attention that Meghan Markle was no longer welcome in elite spaces, that her attempts to leverage celebrity connections had failed, and that Hollywood's power brokers had made a collective decision to erase her from their world. For someone who'd built her entire strategy on access, connections, and elite acceptance, this silent erasure was devastating. And Harry watched it all happen, seeing in real time how the woman he'd sacrificed everything for was being rejected by the very circles she'd claimed to command. The humiliation was complete, and for Harry, it was another crack in the foundation of everything Meghan had told him. The aftermath of that party marked a turning point in their relationship. Sources claim Harry became increasingly withdrawn, spending more time alone, avoiding public events when possible, and having longer, more frequent conversations with family members he'd been estranged from for years. Meghan, sensing her control slipping, allegedly became more desperate in her efforts to maintain their public image and her grip on Harry's decisions. The leaked stories about Harry's homesickness for Britain weren't accidental. They were Harry's way of signaling his true feelings to a world that might be paying attention. His essays about missing British weather, British culture, British traditions, these weren't cute anecdotes. They were cries for help, coded messages from someone who felt trapped and was trying to communicate his reality without explicitly betraying the woman he'd married. The surrogacy allegations resurfaced with new intensity as more people began questioning not just the first pregnancy, but the second as well. Video evidence that Meghan had worked hard to suppress started circulating in corners of the internet. Footage showing her bump appearing to shift, fold, or change size in ways that seemed physically impossible for a natural pregnancy. Medical professionals who analyzed the footage expressed confusion and concern. Royal experts who'd covered dozens of royal pregnancies noted the unprecedented secrecy and the violations of long-standing protocols around royal births. And Harry, according to insiders, began his own quiet investigation into what he'd been told versus what had actually happened. The idea that he might have been deceived about his own children's births, that the line of succession might have been manipulated through deception, was too enormous to fully process. But the evidence kept mounting, and Harry's doubts kept growing. Friends of Harry's who've managed to maintain contact describe a man who's fundamentally broken, struggling with the realization that his entire relationship might have been built on manipulation, lies, and calculated strategies designed to trap him in a situation he can't easily escape. The divorce would be catastrophic, not just personally, but institutionally, racially charged given Meghan's background, and complicated by questions about the children and succession. Meghan knows this, and according to sources, she's used that knowledge as leverage to maintain control even as the relationship deteriorates. The recorded conversations she allegedly kept from their early days together, those would be her insurance policy, her guarantee that if Harry tries to leave or expose what really happened, she has ammunition to destroy him publicly and turn herself into a victim of royal cruelty and institutional racism. But something shifted in Harry recently that has Meghan genuinely worried. The man who was once so easy to manipulate, so vulnerable to her tactics, has started pushing back in ways she didn't anticipate. His private meetings with William and Charles have increased in frequency and length. He's been consulting with lawyers, not Meghan's lawyers, but independent counsel who can advise him on his options and protect his interests separately from hers. He's been reaching out to friends he'd abandoned years ago, tentatively rebuilding bridges that Meghan had burned, and most tellingly, he's been spending more time apart from Meghan, taking separate trips, attending events alone, and creating physical and emotional distance that signals a relationship in its death spiral. Sources close to the situation claim that divorce papers have already been drafted, reviewed, and revised multiple times, sitting in a lawyer's office waiting for the right moment to be filed.
The question now isn't whether Harry will leave Meghan, it's when and how much damage she'll do on her way out. Because Meghan Markle didn't orchestrate one of the most audacious social climbs in modern history just to quietly fade away when it all falls apart. She has recordings. She has secrets. She has ammunition gathered over years of strategic manipulation. And if Harry thinks he can simply walk away and rebuild his life in Britain with his family and friends, he's underestimating the woman who trapped him in the first place. The coming months will likely see a very public, very ugly unraveling of a relationship that many suspected was doomed from the start. Leaks will turn into floods, whispers will become shouts, and the truth that's been carefully suppressed will finally break through the carefully constructed narratives that have defined Harry and Meghan's story. For years, people who questioned their relationship were dismissed as haters, conspiracy theorists, or racists. But now, as the evidence mounts and Harry's misery becomes impossible to hide, those questions are being asked by mainstream observers who can no longer ignore what's been obvious to anyone paying close attention. Meghan Markle targeted a vulnerable prince, engineered their meeting, manipulated him into a rapid marriage, isolated him from everyone who cared about him, and built a web of control so comprehensive that escape seemed impossible. She recorded their private moments as insurance, possibly deceived him about fundamental aspects of their family, and leveraged every connection she had to maintain access to elite circles that ultimately rejected her completely. And Harry, the man who once seemed so confident and full of life, has been reduced to a medicated, withdrawn shadow of himself, trapped in a marriage that's destroying him, while the world watches and waits for the inevitable collapse. The Hollywood rejection at Kris Jenner's party was just a symptom of a much larger problem. Meghan's empire, built on smoke, mirrors, and carefully managed narratives, is crumbling because it was never real to begin with. The elite circles she courted have seen through her strategies and closed their doors. The royal family she married into knows the truth about what she's done to Harry and are quietly preparing for the fallout. The public that once championed her underdog story is waking up to the manipulation and lies that defined her rise. And Harry, the prize she worked so hard to capture, is finally seeing her for what she really is. Not the princess who saved him, but the architect of his destruction. So what happens next? If Harry files for divorce, Meghan will likely paint herself as the victim of institutional cruelty, racism, and a family that never accepted her. She'll leak carefully edited versions of their private conversations, frame every conflict in her favor, and attempt to turn public opinion against Harry and the royals. But this time, people are less likely to believe her because the pattern of behavior is too clear. The contradictions are too obvious, and Harry's visible suffering speaks louder than any carefully crafted PR statement. The surrogacy allegations will likely explode into mainstream conversation, forcing uncomfortable questions about succession, deception, and whether the children are who Meghan claims they are.
Trevor Engelson may finally break his silence completely, sharing the full truth about their marriage, her confessions, and the calculated way she destroyed their relationship when it no longer served her purposes.
Marcus Anderson's role will face intense scrutiny. How he facilitated Meghan's access, who funded her lifestyle, and what his endgame was in engineering her rise to royalty. Financial records will be subpoenaed, revealing the network of support that kept Meghan afloat during years when her acting career couldn't possibly have funded her expensive tastes and elite memberships. The vision board that predicted Harry years before they met will become Exhibit A in the case that their entire relationship was premeditated manipulation rather than organic love. And the recordings Meghan kept as insurance might ultimately become the evidence that destroys her credibility completely. Because who records their intimate moments with their partner unless they plan to use that material as weapons later? Harry's path forward won't be easy. Returning to Britain means facing the family he hurt, the institution he criticized, and the public that watched him abandon his duties for a woman who was playing him from the start. Rebuilding relationships with William, Charles, and the extended family will require humility, honesty, and accountability that Harry has avoided for years. Reconnecting with friends he abandoned means admitting he was wrong to shut them out and apologizing for the pain his choices caused. And processing the full extent of Meghan's manipulation will require therapy, time, and a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths about his own vulnerability and the ways he was exploited. But for the first time in years, there are signs that Harry is ready to do that work, to escape the prison Meghan built around him and to reclaim the life and identity she systematically destroyed.
The world watched a fairy tale romance that seemed too perfect to be real. And now we know it wasn't real at all. Meghan Markle didn't fall in love with Prince Harry. She targeted him, studied him, positioned herself in his path, and executed a plan years in the making. She manipulated his emotions, recorded his vulnerabilities, isolated him from support systems, and built a narrative so compelling that questioning it seemed cruel. But narratives built on lies eventually collapse under the weight of their own contradictions, and Meghan's carefully constructed story is falling apart in real time. The doors that once opened for her are now firmly closed. The elite circles she courted have erased her from their world. The public that championed her is asking uncomfortable questions. And Harry, the man she trapped in her web, is finally finding the strength to break free. Harry stayed silent for years, protecting a woman who engineered every moment of their relationship. He defended her for critics, sacrificed his family relationships, abandoned his royal duties, and rebuilt his entire life around someone who saw him as a stepping stone rather than a partner. But now, with the walls closing in and the truth finally surfacing, Meghan Markle's most ambitious plan, trapping a prince, might become her greatest failure. The doors that once opened for her are now firmly closed. The elite circles she courted have erased her from their world. The public that championed her is asking uncomfortable questions. And Harry, the man she trapped in her web, is finally finding the strength to break free. The question isn't if Harry will leave anymore. Insiders say it's inevitable, just a matter of timing and strategy. The question is whether he can rebuild the life Meghan destroyed, whether the royal family will welcome him back after everything he's done, and whether he can ever truly recover from the psychological damage of years under Meghan's control. But for a man who spent years trapped in a nightmare disguised as a love story, even the possibility of escape must feel like a lifeline. The coming months will reveal the full extent of the deception, the manipulation, and the calculated destruction that defined Harry and Meghan's relationship. And when the truth finally comes out completely, when the recordings are leaked, the financial backers are exposed, the surrogacy evidence is examined, and the full scope of Meghan's plan becomes undeniable, the world will finally understand that this was never a love story. It was a heist, carefully planned and ruthlessly executed. And the prize? A prince who never stood a chance.